This horrifying event occurred when I was young and studying in an old vocational school. I came from the countryside at that time, so I had to stay in the school's dormitory. I also had two other female friends, Lily and Anna, who came from another rural area to study and stayed in the same dormitory as me. Lily was very attractive and pursued by many people, whereas Anna was shy and had never mentioned love before. On the contrary, she was solely focused on her studies. Our dormitory was very cold and dark at night because it was built more than 10 years ago. That was why Anna never wanted to do the bathroom alone. That night, I was falling asleep when I heard someone calling out to me and shaking me to wake me up. I slowly opened my eyes to see what was wrong. Anna was standing next to the bed, her face a little shy, but she wanted me to go to the bathroom with her. Because I was used to it, it didn't bother me, so I agreed right away. The two of us went to the bathroom together and didn't forget to tease her about how shy she was on the way. But in a trembling voice, she stated that this school had been haunted for a long time and that the ghost story was well known to everyone. I didn't believe in ghosts, so when I heard those words, I didn't pay much attention, even laughing at her that she had heard fake news and was scared for no reason. Then I walked away, returned to the bedroom as soon as possible. And Anna, after hearing what I said, seemed angry because I didn't believe what she said. So Anna chased after me. Her face became more serious, her voice no longer trembling, and she tried to tell me the story of the ghost in red who haunted this school. It was a female demon who committed suicide out of love, and thus couldn't flee. I was still not interested in this story, and when we arrived to the bathroom, I just told her to go quickly and return as soon as possible. But Anna was a coward. She didn't want me to wait outside. Instead, she told me to go inside and wait. Seeing Anna's fear, I had no choice but to go inside as she instructed and stood close to the wall to look over. This toilet was in desperate need of repair because it was too old. Suddenly, a gust of cold air blew from nowhere, causing my entire body to shiver uncontrollably. Obviously, this was a closed room, so how could there be such a breeze? So, I urged Anna to hurry up and return as soon as possible. When I turned to have a look at the toilet that Anna was using, I noticed something strange. It was the room next to Anna's that was also being used by another person. I wasn't sure when she was there, but Anna and I walked in and didn't notice her. What was odd was that she was wearing red high heels instead of slippers like the rest of us. It was after midnight, the dorms were closed. No one should dress up to go out at this time, and wearing high heels to the bathroom was unusual. Although I wasn't afraid of ghosts, seeing that scene made me nervous, so I knocked on Anna's door and continued to urge her. Anna's face was slightly irritated when she walked out as a result of my constant prodding. I didn't say much, just told her that I needed to get back to my room. Anna teased me at the time because she thought standing outside alone made me scared, while I dared to say I wasn't afraid of ghosts. I didn't dare to mention the strange woman next to Anna's room because I knew she was very cowardly, so I sneaked a glance to confirm once more if it was really human after all. But unexpectedly, the woman in red shoes vanished and the bathroom was deserted. I couldn't only reassure myself that I was mistaken because I had heard Anna's story and imagined it myself. After that, we returned to the bedroom and I decided not to tell Anna what I had seen. I quickly fell asleep, but no longer after my entire body went numb and it became difficult to breathe as if someone was pressing against me. The air became very cold. I heard the door being opened very loudly. A woman dressed in bright red dress with long black hair stood there. I panicked and took a close look at the woman. Her face was extremely frightening. Her wide mouth was full of blood. Her eyes without pupils, only white, and her neck appeared to have been squeezed by something, leaving a fairly obvious mark. Her dress was ripped, but the scariest part was that she was wearing a pair of red high heels, the same ones I saw in the bathroom just before. She was also floating with her feet barely touching the ground. Apparently, she was the female demon Anna mentioned. She just hovered like that and came to Anna's bed. Anna suddenly sat up, not hearing any voice or movement from her. I could only see Anna sat up as if she was ordered to do so by the demon. Anna's eyes were lifeless, like a sleepwalker, and her skin had turned pale. Anna jumped out of bed and began walking slowly across my bed, right behind the female demon. Anna lowered her face, but her body continued to walk unconsciously. I was terrified, but I didn't want Anna to follow the demon, so I screamed and tried to stop her, but my mouth was glued shut. I couldn't open it, and my body was heavy and numb. So, I had no choice but to watch Anna follow the demon out of the room. I was dreaming when I was startled awake by a scream. When I awoke, I opened my eyes and saw that the room was lit, indicating that it was all a dream. Looking at the door, I noticed Lily and other girls from the other room gathered outside. It appeared that something had happened to Anna, because the roommate next door appeared very concerned. She said with a serious face and trembling voice, something happened to Anna, and she asked everyone to come to have a look. Anna was in the bathroom. I looked over at Anna's bed, and she was no longer there. I began to be concerned about my dream last night. We were all panicked and at the time rushed there to see Anna's situation. In my heart, I just hoped she didn't meet anything serious. Lily was the first to arrive, and I still didn't know what happened to Anna. When I heard Lily scream in fear, I was startled as well. I also rushed inside to watch as most heinous thing I could not bear happening right in front of my eyes. Anna was dead. She was sitting on the floor, her skin pale. Could it be that my dream from the previous night came true, and it was the female demon who killed her? Anna's eyes wide open but white, and her face no longer had bloodstains, and she died because she cut her own wrist. The blood was all over the floor and she must have been in great pain. Later, Anna's family members joined the procession to return Anna's body to her hometown. They also had a heated debate with the school, while the school claiming that Anna committed suicide out of love. But I knew Anna had never had a lover and would never do something so stupid. I couldn't get a good sleep after that night. When I recalled the scene on the day Anna died, I always got agitated. In a dream, I saw Anna standing next to the bed, jolting me awake. Seeing Anna again made me very happy, and despite the fact that she was dead, I felt no fear. However, Anna appeared to be in a hurry. She simply stated that I needed to go and immediately drew my hand out of bed. I looked down and saw that the cut on Anna's wrist was still open and that the blood was flowing. I began to panic because I remembered the demon in red, afraid that she would have transformed into Anna and seduced me the same way she had taken Anna away that night, so I struggled to fight back. Anna's face erupted in rage. She held and dashed towards me. She rushed to me, yelling that there was no time and that I must leave immediately. I awoke from my dream at the same time I heard Lily scream. We exchanged glances and discussed the previous dream. Strangely, Lily had the same dream as me. We believed that Anna wanted us to leave the building for a reason, so without a doubt we dashed to the door and fled as quickly as we could. As soon as we arrived on the ground floor, a plume of black smoke rose out from the floor. Lily and I were both terrified and had no idea what was going on. The fire broke out after a few minutes and spread to the other floors of the building. Fortunately, we could escape in time. Lily and I stood dumbfounded, looking up at our windows, where a figure stood, staring at us. It was Anna, looking at us through the windows with a happy smile on her face. It turned out that Anna was the one who saved us from the fire. Perhaps it was because this was the last thing she wanted to do for us that her smile was so satisfying. This is a horror story that happened to a girl named Sugi and her dorm friends. Sugi used to have a happy family. However, her father often beat her mother and her because of drinking and gambling. Since then, Sugi's personality had become quieter. As time passed, Sugi went to a vocational boarding school and stayed there because of the difficult family situation. She was registered here by her mother in order for it to be convenient for both studying and traveling. The documents and procedures were quite simple, so Sugi would move in immediately. Sugi followed the instructions, brought the luggage to the school dormitory to prepare to clean and rest, and the next day she would start the first day of school. The room where Sugi lived included 4 bunk beds for 4 people. Sugi and her roommates quickly got to know each other and befriended each other. That night, as everyone in the room fell asleep, only Sugi could not sleep because of the strange place. In the middle of the night, Sugi was awakened by the aimless singing of a female roommate. The loud singing caused not only Sugi but also the other friends sleeplessness. Yoko was woken up, so she turned on the light in annoyance. It was the singing of Anna, a female friend lying in the corner of the room, opposite Sugi's bed. To avoid being punished by the supervisor, Yoko quickly turned off the lights. Then the whole room approached Anna, asking what was wrong with her. But how to ask? Anna still refused to answer, just singing idly. After a while, Anna burst out laughing like a madman. Anna's hair at the time was messy like a crow's nest. The inherent pink skin also suddenly turned pale. Pale like an anemic person, looking very scary. Then Anna suddenly stood up and went straight to the dressing table. All evening no one spoke to Anna. Whoever talked to her did not respond, just sitting in front of the mirror singing nonsense like a madman. Sugi saw Anna like that. She couldn't hide her bewilderment and approached Anna and advised her to go to sleep. But when she saw Sugi standing near her, Anna's body suddenly trembled, laughing a few times, looking terrible. Her eyes rolled back to the ceiling. At that time, people in the room saw Anna like that. Everyone panicked, thinking that Anna was sleepwalking. Sugi immediately grabbed Anna's shoulder to try to wake her up. Anna suddenly fell down on the bed in front of her friend in the room. A few seconds later, Anna's eyes widened, foaming at the mouth, and her whole body twisted and looked very scary. Sugi was looking at Anna at that time, and also showed panic. She thought it was because of herself that Anna was like this, so she frantically called the others to take Anna to the school's medical room. Sugi and her friends in the dormitory hurriedly carried Anna on their backs and ran straight to the school's medical room. On the way, suddenly Anna woke up. She blankly looked at Sugi and her surroundings, not understanding what was going on and why she was brought here. Sugi also quickly dropped her friend to the ground. After that, Anna and the others also returned to the room. Anna sat among all the friends in the dorm, telling all the strange things she had encountered before showing strange expressions like earlier. Before going to bed, Anna sat at the table and brushed her hair, but for some reason after that, she fell asleep and she was no longer conscious of anything. But this happened over and over again with Anna. Not only her, but everyone in the room felt fear for that. Anna couldn't take it anymore, so she applied for a leave of absence from school and moved to another place. A long time later, Sugi's dorm room also had a new friend moving in. She thought everything was over, but unexpectedly something strange happened. In the middle of the night, this girl also went to the mirror, acting exactly like Anna before, looking very strange. At this time, Sugi's new friend was sitting in front of the mirror, eyes wide with ghostly appearances and black lips that looked like a corpse. Sugi and the friends in the room who witnessed the scene could only fear but did not dare to wake her again, for fear of the same situation as Anna. After a while, this girl kept rolling on the bed, sleeping soundly as nothing happened. Everyone in the room then turned on the lights. Sugi went to her friend's bed and woke the girl up. The girl didn't understand what was going on, bewilderedly looking at everyone standing around the bed looking at her, then asked Sugi why she woke her up at this hour. Sugi then told her friend about the strange incident she had met, but the girl still insisted that she had never sleepwalked. Because Sugi felt worried and suspected that the room she was in was something scary, Sugi went to ask people around if there had been many people who had a similar situation before. But the people in the area were not as friendly as she thought, especially when they heard about her dorm. Everyone started shouting loudly, sending her group away, refusing to talk. Things could not find a solution, so the members in the room became even more tired. After everyone in the room experienced this feeling once, Sugi was the next victim. That night while she was sleeping, she was suddenly woken up by a voice. Sugi clearly sensed that someone was looking at her, so she ventured to glance to the side and see a big black shadow. She jumped all over herself, rolled her eyes at the black shadow in front of her. Her mouth opened as if she wanted to call her friend, but then she couldn't do anything. After a while, Sugi felt sleeplessness creeping in on her. She couldn't feel or control anything anymore. The black shadow immediately moved to the side of Sugi's bed. The cold air and the stench of the corpses rose strongly. Then, this ghost immediately stretched out its thin, bony hand, step by step touching Sugi's body. Sugi opened her eyes and the face of this ghost appeared clearly for her to see with bright and white eyes. Moments later, Sugi began to sleepwalk. She started to sit up and get out of the bed. Then Sugi went straight to the dressing table, picked up the comb in front of the mirror. The image in the mirror reflected the hand of someone other than her. Luckily, Sugi woke up, looked back at herself, feeling a little tired. She glanced in the mirror to see what was wrong. Suddenly, Sugi saw that the person in the mirror was not herself at all, but a certain woman who looked very scary. Sugi turned around in a panic to take a look and saw the woman in the mirror brushing her hair. She immediately ran to the bed, her whole body shaking with fear. The friends in her room were awakened. They also approached Sugi and wondered how Sugi was able to get out of a sleepwalking situation. It was only then that Sugi realized that the other people in the room looked at her. They knew what was wrong with her and then woke up from her sleepwalking quickly. That night, Sugi's whole room stayed up all night. Everyone in the room sat together by the window. They told everything they had seen and everything was exactly as Sugi saw it. There was a friend in the room who couldn't hide her curiosity, so she discussed how to fight that female ghost. Sugi realized that the thing that helped her wake up was the treasure that her grandmother left behind. It was a pendant made of marble with a very large Buddha image engraved on it. She looked at the pendant. Childhood memories returned to her once more. When she was young, her grandmother gave her this pendant, telling her to always carry it with her as her amulet. After that incident, Sugi was so obsessed that she couldn't sleep, and the other friends in the room also moved out. Sugi had to leave too. Staying in this room was too dangerous. After applying for leave, Sugi stood at the beginning of the street, waiting to catch the bus to go home. At that time, she inadvertently attracted the attention of the neighbors. A man who had been in the area for a long time next to her dorm approached. He told her about what happened in the dormitory she was staying in. In the past, her dorm room was the room of a female warden. Because she was upset about being raped by the superintendent, she committed suicide in that room. Since then, anyone who had stayed in that room had experienced sleepwalking in the middle of the night. No one dared to say that they had met a ghost. Then they moved away because they couldn't stay there anymore. It occurred in 2015 at a vocational high school in Nagakawa, Japan. That year, I graduated from middle school but failed to enter high school, so I enrolled in this vocational technical school to learn how to repair machines. Our school had just built a new and very spacious facility, and the three of us lived together in a dormitory. The bond between the three of us was strong. On a weekend I played poker with a friend in the dorm, but if there were only 2 players it was a little sad, so we were going to invite the other guy, Yoshi, to join us. However, because Yoshi was not in the dorm, we didn't have much fun playing most of the time. Yoshi was in fact very different from the rest of us. He had been accepted to a prestigious high school that year, but he chose this one instead. We noticed him staring at his phone that day with a blank face, so we crept up behind him. We all assumed Yoshi was in love, secretly chatting or watching a 18+ movie at the time. But as we got closer, we noticed that he was staring at a photo on his phone and still had tears in his eyes. It was a picture of him with a short middle-aged man. It seemed to be his father. The 2 of them were standing beneath a stone wall, and their smiles were especially warm in the photograph. We were surprised to see the situation, but we both assumed he was homesick. "Do you miss home?" the other friend inquired. I mocked him a few sentences, not with malice, just to make him feel better. "How old are you? Still crying?" But Yoshi still didn't say anything, and when he did, we were both taken aback. "Today is the first death anniversary of my father." We recognized that teasing Yoshi was a mistake. Fortunately, Yoshi was not the type of person who was difficult to get along with, nor did he blame us. Rather, he freely told us his story. We also learned more about his father from the story Yoshi was about to tell. Yoshi's hometown was located in the mountainous region of Gifu province. Despite living in a poor rural area, Yoshi's family life was very good because his father had a unique profession. In addition to farm work, his father went to the mountains to collect medical herbs, and the most difficult part was that he had to climb the sharp cliffs by tying a rope around his waist. Of course, this was extremely dangerous, and the mountains there were high and steep, and there were cliffs at the mountain's base, If you had fallen, you would certainly die. But taking these risks was worthwhile for Yoshi's father because the celandine, a valuable medicinal herb, grew on the rock ledge. The celandine was unknown to many people before, but in recent years, it had suddenly become extremely valuable because it could cure some rare diseases at the time, and its price was rising. And because Yoshi's father risked his life to climb the cliffs, every time he could pick the celandine, he would earn a large sum of money. As a result, the entire family's life was improved. He was very satisfied despite the fact that it was difficult and dangerous. However, he was very frugal, only using an old rope to climb up and down, which frequently worried Yoshi's mother because the old rope would be unstable. A year ago, the rope wrapped around the cliff and broke while he was taking medicines from the cliff. When the rope snapped, he lost the protection and fell off the cliff. Everything happened so quickly, he didn't have time to grasp anything. In fact, their family was very concerned about this herb picking job. The family has warned him numerous times not to continue because it was extremely dangerous. But he always laughed and encouraged Yoshi to work hard at school. It would cost money to get into university later, so he wouldn't do it until Yoshi graduated. Yoshi's tears welled up again as he said this time, the first time we saw a child blaming himself for being so good at studying. I turned around and ran outside after hearing Yoshi's story and seeing how sad he was remembering his father. Many people considered that I was a smart boy. Everyone knew that I always did things on purpose but could never guess what I was going to do next. After 4 or 5 minutes, I ran in from the outside, lit 3 cigarettes stolen from the house next door. Yoshi's tears were flowing again at this point. He was very emotional. Honestly, I was not sure if this was appropriate, but it was a tribute to Yoshi's father. We lit 3 cigarettes and placed them on the windowsill, bowing 3 times simultaneously. After all of this, we were well-connected friends. We had a good time again. In this way, even after the cigarette had been extinguished, the father and son's emotions were always kept in their hearts. But when we went to bed that night, we experienced something very strange. We all slept soundly that night, but in the middle of the night, I awoke, feeling extremely cold for no apparent reason. I awoke but couldn't move. I could only open my eyes. At this point, I noticed a person standing in front of Yoshi's bed, a vague black shadow whose face couldn't be seen clearly. But I had a strong feeling that the person was his deceased father. The man sat on Yoshi's bed, smoking a cigarette and still talking to him in his mouth. His voice was so deep that I could only faintly hear it. He admitted it was his fault and advised Yoshi to take good care of himself, his mother, and to do well in school when he grew up. Yoshi was crying all the time, but he didn't wake up. Perhaps he was having a very sad dream. Yoshi's father remained bedside, talking to him. Then I fell asleep, and when I woke, it was already dawn. Yoshi's eyes were very red after waking up, and the dark circles under his eyes were also very visible, possibly due to his dream last night, in which he cried all night. I asked him if he had a nightmare the night before, because I saw Yoshi cry a lot. I quickly remembered last night's incident and told Yoshi. Yoshi stated that he had a dream about his father last night in which he was smoking next to his bed. When he finished, the other boy couldn't help but be surprised. There truly had been a conversation between Yoshi and his father, and I was an eyewitness to it. That guy suddenly shouted, "Look! There are actually some cigarette butts at the foot of Yoshi's bed!" We had to know that none of the 3 people in our dorm could smoke, and a strange feeling came over us. I couldn't help but recall the person I saw last night in Yoshi's dream, in which Yoshi's father sat in this position and smoked. Yoshi's tears flowed again as he sat on the bed, reaching out his hand to touch where his father had sat, as if the warmth that his father had left behind remained. "Don't worry, Dad. When I grow up, I'll take care of myself and Mother. I'll be a strong man." This was a sacred event that I witnessed firsthand, and to be honest, I was not afraid. In my heart, I only had a warm feeling about Yoshi's father-son relationship. We all graduated. Yoshi was introduced to work by the school, and the salary was also good. I believed his father was also relieved. In mid-June last year, I started attending a university in the city, so I had to move into a dormitory. That day, in the city, the rainy season started, so the rain didn't stop all day. I had to carry my luggage alone in the cold rain. As I was walking past the flowers in the schoolyard, I accidentally stepped on a black umbrella. At that time, I wanted to find the owner of this umbrella, but I couldn't find anyone around. So I decided to bring this umbrella to the dormitory and wait for the rain to stop and try to find the owner of the umbrella later. But when I got to the dorm, I had to rush to change my wet clothes and prepare a place to sleep. Meanwhile, I hung this umbrella on the top and I completely forgot about its existence. After that, I started meeting my roommates and getting to know them, and then went to the class for the first lesson. After a long day, I studied until late at night. When I was tired, I went to bed. Before I slept, I tried to change my rain-soaked clothes quickly and went to the bathroom to wash. After I finished washing clothes and returned to my room, I accidentally discovered that in the hallway of my room there was a faint black shadow. I thought someone was drying clothes, so I went out to have a look, but when I got there, no one was there. I tried looking around, but honestly, I was alone in the hallway. That made me a bit confused. Then I looked up at the black umbrella and thought to myself that I would return it the next morning. After that, I dried my clothes, went back to my bed and slept until the next morning. Early in the morning, my friends woke me up and they found out that I had a high fever. Because my roommate was worried about my health, she said she would ask for permission to let me take a leave and notify the administrator. After that, I decided to lock myself in my room and thought that it must be because of the rain yesterday that I caught a cold like this. While my friends went to their first lessons in class, I was lying on the bed and sleeping. But after a while, I heard footsteps echoing in my room. I could feel someone walking into my room and then across my bed and out onto the balcony where I hung my clothes. Then this mysterious person came in and stood beside my bed. She stared at me. I was startled and quickly turned around to see who it was, but I panicked when I saw a young man with a wet body standing next to the bed. In his hand, that young man was holding a black umbrella that I picked up in the flower bush. But the scariest thing at the time was the bloody, disfigured face of the angry young man looking at me with fear. I screamed out in fear and sat up, shuffled behind the bed. I didn't know what to do. Seeing that, the young man put down his umbrella and put his hand on my side to push me into a dead end. After that, a young man used his hoarse voice to scold me for taking away his black umbrella. This horrible young man forced me to return the black umbrella that I stole, which made me cry in fear. While being pushed to the wall by the young man, I accidentally hit my head on the wall behind me. After a while, I heard someone calling my name. When I opened my eyes, I saw a woman in front of me. I woke up and sat up and saw that the manager of our room, she was still looking at me with worry. She said my roommate told her I had a fever, so she came here to check it out and then asked me what I was dreaming about and why I screamed like that. I was confused and didn't know how to answer her. Then she and I looked down at the ground. At the time, I panicked to see the black umbrella that I hung on the balcony, which was suddenly now in my room. I remembered, so I panicked and told the manager that I had met a scary young man. The owner of this umbrella came here to reclaim it. She didn't say anything after listening, just silently picked up the umbrella and told me to follow her out. Her attitude at the time surprised me. It seemed like she already knew something. I followed her to the office and saw her leave the umbrella at the door and go to the table. She called me to the table and asked me to sit down and told me a story about this umbrella. The owner of the umbrella was a student of my school and lived in my dorm room. He was a person with a difficult background. His father was a gambling addict and left him to take care of his grandmother. Because of his family's difficult situation, This young man considered quitting his studies, but he was supported by his teachers and raised enough money to pay for his tuition. The studious young man felt very lucky with that, so he studied hard and achieved admirable results. After that, he passed the entrance exam to my university and became the first valedictorian with the highest score in school ever since. During that time, he studied and worked on many different jobs to pay for his school fees. With his gentle and hard-working nature, he was very popular with friends and teachers, so everyone helped him with some money. But instead of taking the money, he refused because he thought that his savings from overtime could help him pay and leave the scholarship money to another friend with more difficult circumstances. Things started happening when entering the second semester at this dormitory. At the time, his father somehow found the dormitory and came here to find him in a miserable state. This man begged him to give him some food because he loved his father so much. The young man couldn't send him away. After that, he went down to the canteen and bought his father some food and brought it up to his room to eat. But when he returned to his room, he found his father had disappeared without leaving a message. After that, the young man looked over his desk and saw that the tuition money he had worked so hard to save was gone. Knowing who the thief was, he and the school called the police. However, with the little information provided, it was difficult for the police to catch his father. His roommate at the time also said that they had some valuables taken away, but no one blamed them. Not only that, after the incident happened, his roommates continuously comforted and tried to help him through this difficult time. But unexpectedly, this became a shock to the young man. That made him taciturn, quiet, and did not want to meet anyone. Until one day the whole dormitory suddenly became chaotic after a loud noise resounded from the balcony. His teachers and friends were all shocked when they discovered that the young man had committed suicide in the rain. The corpse of the young man lay motionless in a pool of blood. No one would dare to come near him. At that time, the person who felt pity for the young man was the manager of the dormitory, who was also the manager now. Out of pity for the young man's plight, she used this black umbrella to cover him from the rain and keep the scene intact. She stood in the rain, covered him with an umbrella until his body was loaded into an ambulance and taken away. After the incident, because of the chaos, her umbrella got lost somewhere unknown and gradually drifted into her oblivion. She then asked me where I found this umbrella in surprise. At the time, I told her that I saw an umbrella in the flowers in the dormitory yard. The manager got upset and said that's where the young man committed suicide that year. The heavy atmosphere between her and I was suddenly destroyed by a cold wind blowing across the room. We both looked at the door in surprise and saw that someone was looking at us. The manager immediately realized that it was the student who was in the accident when he was coming to claim the umbrella with his wet body. I was so scared that my face turned pale and I didn't dare to say anything. And the manager was so scared that she shivered. But then, she stood up again and walked towards the student. Her action surprised me. She suppressed her fear and walked over to hug the unfortunate student. At that time, all the resentment in the young man suddenly turned into a smoke that flew into the air. The young man then also disappeared, and she collapsed on the floor. When I arrived, I found her body drenched, surrounded by strange puddles of water. Then she cried and whispered that he was a good person. After that, it was over and I didn't see that student anymore. My manager at the time continued to manage my dormitory and she was very popular with the students here. The black umbrella was still there, hanging by her in the office as a souvenir for the deceased student.
This story happened to a young man named Jusu. After graduating 12th grade, he passed the entrance exam to a university in the city. Living in an unfamiliar place was extremely difficult, but it only took Jusu a few days to settle in. He even made friends with 2 boys in his dorm and was about to have his first college trip. The trip's location was not far away. In fact, it was just a hill next to the school. As planned, they would camp overnight on the hill. The air on the hill was really fresh. Although the hike up the hill was a bit rough, no one felt tired. However, things were not going smoothly. After walking for a while, they started to get lost. Eventually, they found a small path covered with trees. It looked very murky and mysterious. At the end of the small path lay a cold and lonely grave in the woods. Jusu was basically a child without fear. Seeing that, he invited two of his friends to come for a closer look. At first glance, it definitely looked like a tomb, but the shape of the tomb was really strange. The other two boys only stood there for a few minutes, then left. But Jusu still lingered, standing there, staring at the tomb. But strangely enough, the more he looked, the more he felt some kind of magical energy. This energy completely engrossed him. Then, his friend came over, shook his shoulder and called his name, loudly. Jusu suddenly woke up, but Jusu's face was still pale, and his limbs soft. He was sweating like a waterfall. Not only Jusu's face, but also his friends' faces had deteriorated, as if they had just seen something terrifying. The picnic must stop. But from that day on, strange things kept happening to dorm room 310. The first thing that happened was with Jusu's slippers. He has a habit of neatly arranging his slippers under the bed when he sleeps. But since that night, he was waking up to his slippers dispersed all around his room. Days later, the slippers were still being rearranged all over his dorm. So Jusu decided to talk to his roommates. But their expressions were very strange. One afternoon, Jusu suddenly saw all his roommates packing up, as if they wanted to leave. He thought they must be angry about the trivial matter a few days before, and that they decided to move. But looking at their facial expressions, Jusu could tell it was for other reasons. Then, someone new moved in, and his old roommates left overnight. But Jusu stayed because he really didn't believe in ghost stories. Until one night. On a normal evening, while reading a book, Jusu fell asleep and was woken up by the dorm's bell. But he just closed his eyes, ignoring it. 5 hours passed, and it was dinner time. At dinner, the dorm manager didn't see him come down. She was afraid that something was wrong. She ran upstairs to call him. Not believing his eyes, he looked at his watch again. But it was still 5 o'clock. His watch had stopped working. Even though he panicked a little, Jusu tried to reassure himself that he had just fallen asleep while reading the book. After dinner, Jusu decided to finish reading the book before going to bed. But with only a few lines, he could barely hold his eyes open. His body really couldn't resist sleep. Then he put the book aside, turned off the light, and went to bed. Suddenly, he woke up at 4 a.m. in a panic, as if he had just had a nightmare. Not only that, he had also found himself wearing proper clothes. But from what he remembers, he wore an old t-shirt to bed yesterday. His feet even wore shoes, and the shoes were covered with dirt and mud, as if he had been walking around for a long time. The shoes made his bed muddy. But Jusu really couldn't remember where he went yesterday. He just remembered turning off the lights and going to bed. On the sole of his muddy shoes, there was still fresh grass, so he could tell that he definitely went outside. In order to clarify what happened to him, Jusu decided to find his best friend Ken. who lived in the same dorm before. After school, Jusu secretly followed Ken to the garage. Looking around, seeing no one, Jusu immediately approached his best friend. Then, he suddenly grabbed his neck and pulled him into a hidden corner in the garage. As soon as he saw Jusu, Ken panicked, as if seeing a ghost. Blood drained from his face. After being released by Jusu and knowing the reason for his actions, Ken was able to calm down, but his hands and feet were still shaking. Of course, Ken firmly refused to answer Jusu's questions, only asking him to let go. Seeing that, Jusu began to soften his voice, saying that he really wanted to know what happened after they returned from their picnic. Seeing Jusu's facial expression, Ken started to feel pity. He lowered his face and thought for a long time. Observing Ken's body language, Jusu could tell that something bad had happened to him. Ever since coming to this city, he considered Ken his best friend. But now, when he was in trouble, the only thing Ken was doing was avoiding him. Immediately his anger erupted. Jusu could no longer keep calm. He grabbed Ken by the collar. Facing Jusu's anger, Ken gave in and finally accepted to speak the truth. It turned out that the strange things started happening after Jusu stood in front of the grave on the school trip. Ken told Jusu that he looked like he was possessed by a ghost. His eyes rolled back and his whole face was pale and mouth grinning wide. He told him that he also started waving his hands and feet and was singing like a crazy man. Ken went on to say that after that day, when the clock hit 12 o'clock, he got out of bed and would sleepwalk around the dorm. Ken said that every night was like that, and that Jusu kept pacing back and forth in the bathroom. He said that he kept banging his head against the wall and his mouth muttering something terrifying. Seeing Jusu's unusual behavior, Ken said that all the friends in the dorm were sure he was haunted, and then everyone chose to leave for peace. Hearing this, Jusu couldn't control his emotions, giving Ken a strong fist to the face. After that, he left Ken sitting on the ground. Jusu then called his father to tell him everything and got scolded by him. It seemed he knew how scary the tomb was. His face blacked out, and with a cold voice, he began to talk about the unknown tomb. 2 days later, after receiving the call, the father immediately set off and went to the dormitory where his son was staying. As soon as he arrived, Jusu's father asked to take him to the unknown tomb. Jusu also didn't say anything more. He immediately led his father to the hill next to the school. Jusu's father looked at the anonymous tomb for a long time. His face looked very serious. Then, he sat on the ground and opened the wooden chest he had brought along. It turned out that inside was copper brass. Then, he used this copper brass to burn pieces of votive paper. Soon after, Jusu's father stood up. His mouth began to murmur, as if he was reciting a spell. Strangely, as soon as his words ended, the copper brass trembled in a frightening way. Then, the fire in the brass was burning louder and louder, like someone added oil to it. At that same time, the father's face became more serious. It seemed that their request made the soul angry. In that moment, Jusu was clearly terrified, thinking that he could be haunted for the rest of his life. The father was also a bit panicked, but still tried to stay calm to reassure him. He put his hand on Jusu's shoulder, saying that he would try to ask again. This time, Jusu's father prayed more sincerely. He bent down, clasped his hands respectfully. When the father finished his plead, the fire in the brass immediately shrank. It seemed that the spirit had accepted his appeal. No hurry to leave, after finishing everything, Jusu and his father still lingered to burn the remaining holy paper. Then they tidied up the ashes, cleaned the tomb, and left. Perhaps Jusu would never forget the horror that happened to him on this strange grave. Afterwards, he also realized how much his father worried about him. Although his face was always calm, his shirt was already drenched in sweat on his back. He also realized that his father's profession was not as bad as he always thought it to be. Although he did not show it much, he really loved his son so much. A few days later, Jusu's life began to settle down again. Perhaps this is why our grandparents often told us not to stare at the grave of the deceased. This horror story took place in a dormitory. Our story begins with a student named Akio moving into her new dormitory, a place she would be living with 3 other students for the duration of her 4 years of college. Aiko was quick to notice that one of the girls was quite unlike the others. Whereas the others seemed joyful and friendly, this girl seemed cold and distant, and she never looked away from the book she was reading. Aiko soon learned she had moved into room 1304, a room known for its troubled and disturbing past. Aiko spent the rest of the day unaware of the events that would unfold. And so, on her first night, something strange occurred. Aiko was taking a bath when suddenly she heard a loud knocking on the bathroom door. She stood there for a second and remembered that the 2 girls had gone out, so it couldn't have been either of them. As she continued to think, the knocking began again. At this point, she froze. Then it hit her. It must be Tanny, that cold, weird girl, she thought. She cracked the door open and yelled at her to stop. But Tanny did not respond. Not that Aiko cared much, as the knocking had stopped. Although it wasn't long until the knocking started again. As annoyed as she could be, she put on her shirt, wrapped her half-washed hair in a towel, and went out to put an end to it. To Aiko's surprise, there was no one in the room. All she could feel was a dim, cold breeze. Aiko tried hard to reassure herself that this was nothing but a weird occurrence, but the fear could not stop creeping in on her. She gathered up the courage and went out to the hallway. But just like her dorm, it was empty and dark. She rushed back in and quickly closed the door. She was starting to shake. The thought of the supernatural never occurred to her. She only worried about being stalked by a pervert and wanted to stay safe. A few moments passed and Akio started to calm down, but not enough. The knocking started again. Aiko took a deep breath and slowly opened the door. This time, there was a woman standing in front of her, soaking wet. Akio screamed in shock. And then she realized it was Tani, her quiet roommate. Akio, relieved, asked Tani when she went out and why she was wet, but Tani did not say a word. Regardless, she felt sorry for her roommate, and after all, she was standing there dirty, wet, her face as pale as the moon, and with an expression that lacked confidence. She put aside the annoyance of her silence and decided to care for Tani. She had Tani sit on the bed and went to get a towel to help her dry herself. She patiently waited until Tani had calmed down and with a soft and delicate tone asked her what had happened, but Tani did not speak. Frustrated, Akio told her that if she did not want to talk, that she would have to go get the dorm manager. This seemed to have worked. Tani finally spoke up. Her voice was trembling, as she said that something had happened to her mother. As soon as she finished speaking, Tani, as if remembering something, stood up and walked towards her desk. Then she looked through the drawer. She was looking for something. Tani was looking for her phone. She was starting to look desperate, searching. Tani rummaged for a while, but couldn't find it. She turned to Akio and asked to borrow her phone. She then proceeded to tell her story. She had come this morning with her mother from the countryside to enroll at the school. That morning, they had to hastily leave their home as there weren't any other trains leaving that day. Her mother wanted to stay with Tani for a few days to help her get settled, but she had to leave that same day as she had 2 younger children that needed to be taken care of at home. She kept on going about her family's story. She lost her father at a young age, which brought a big burden to her mother. She wanted to help her, get a job, and support the family, but her mother refused. Ayiko just stood there, tense and uncomfortable, and she did not understand what was going on. Tani then continued. She had gone out to buy groceries when she saw on the news that a train had derailed and sank into the river. She immediately thought of her mother. As soon as she said that, Akio pulled out her phone. Throughout all of this, Akio was confused and shocked, but she knew she needed to help Tani make a call. So she called the number that Tani gave her, but no one answered. Thinking that maybe Tani had read the wrong number, Akio gave the phone to her and asked her to try again. Tani was obviously in distress. She was shaking and her eyes were welling up. But once again, no one answered. The worry and fear could no longer be held. Tani cried loudly. Tears kept flowing down from her cheeks as she kept on crying for her mom. Akio tried hard to keep herself together, even though she was panicking inside. She tried to calm her roommate down. Keeping her posture and thinking quickly, Akio suggested they should go and check at her home for themselves. Tani was quick to reject the offer. She wanted to go alone. Before Akio could react, Tani stood up and left, but not before looking at her in the eyes and saying thank you. Akio refused to let her go on her own in such a state, but it was pointless. She was gone. Tani was so fast that by the time Akio went out to the door, Tani was already at the end of the hallway. She just stood there as her figure disappeared into the distance. Akio stood at the door for a moment, which felt like an eternity, observing everything, trying to make sense of things. She was shocked to the point of losing control of her limbs. She could barely stand in place. She was panicking and trying to tell herself that this must be a mistake or a bad dream. The next morning, Akio went rushing to see the manager. She wanted to ask about Tani's contact information. Once there, she asked for her, but the manager looked confused. He told her that she must have gone to the wrong dorm because there wasn't a Tani registered there. As soon as she heard that, her face went dark. The possibility of having met a ghost crossed her mind. As she was walking down the hall, lost in thought, she met one of her roommates. Akio wanted to leave no trace of doubt, so she asked her about Tani. The question, in turn, made her roommate almost faint. As it turns out, Tani had been a student living in room 1304 until she died in a train accident 5 years ago. She told Akio that ever since that day, people have seen strange shadows in that dorm, and more than one had suggested it was Tani. By now, Akio could just not hold it together anymore. The pain, stress, and fear were just too much. She broke in tears. She was putting together all the pieces of the events from the last 24 hours. Everything pointed towards one explanation. Could it be that she had met a ghost the night before? The thoughts were too much. She broke down, shaking and crying, until she passed out of exhaustion. A few days passed. Akio had managed to assimilate what had happened and decided to take the train to Tani's home. She arrived at what was now an abandoned house. Inside of it, there was a photo of Tani's mom. As it turns out, Tani's mother had also passed away just a day after her daughter. She couldn't bear the pain and sorrow of losing a child. On her way out, she stumbled upon a tomb. Engraved in it were the names of Tani and her mother. She thought how strange it was to have them both buried in the same tomb. Tani's two other siblings ended up being adopted by the uncle. On her way home, Akio could not stop thinking about the mother and the daughter. She felt an incredible sorrow for these two. Who knows, maybe your roommate will turn out to be a ghost as well. And if that's the case, make sure you tell us the story.